Hi, and welcome to the very first episode of Forever Wild, Stories from the McGovern Girls. I'm Meagan McGovern.
And I'm Nora McGovern Gibbs, or Nora Gibbs. I used to be Nora. In the first episode, we're going to unpack the remarkable, chaotic life of our mother, Maureen McGovern.
You don't really get to ever be an ex-McGovern. Sorry, you're stuck with it.
Nope.
Today's episode is all about our mother, Maureen's obituary. It's an obituary that went viral on TikTok last year. And if you've read it or seen it online, you'll know why. If you haven't read it, buckle up.
And it went viral because it's not your typical beloved mother and wife obituary. It's raw, colorful, and messy, just like she was. We changed the way we're doing this for you. We originally tried this where we read the obituary as it was, and it just wasn't us. It didn't sound like us. It wasn't the way we wanted to portray our mother's obituary. And it didn't work for us. So we're going to post the original obituary for you on our socials once we figure out how to get that done.
So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about my mother's obituary and her life and, kind of discuss what happened with it. And so here we go. Nora, go for it.
All right. So Maureen Alice Smith, our mother, she was born July 2nd, 1938 in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. She was the oldest child of Bernard Smith and Eva Goldbeski, and they both doted on her. She and her three younger siblings were raised on Staten Island. Her parents were from the Adirondacks in upstate New York, and she spent summers picking wild blueberries and taking baths in a big iron tub in her grandmother's living room. The motto for the Adirondacks is Forever Wild, and that's one of the reasons we chose this for a podcast time. When she was in high school, she had her first baby that she gave up for adoption. After being sent away to a home for unwed mothers, which was run by nuns, her first son was named Christopher. She went to Hunter College and then to Wagner and then to a college in San Francisco, but she did not manage to graduate.
And that background on my mother, just that she was a nice Catholic girl raised in Staten Island by a nice family. Her mother, Eva, was a Polish-Lithuanian immigrant. Her father, Bernard Smith, they came from a mining family in the Adirondacks. They were stout Catholic people who had been hard living in the Adirondacks for a long time. It's cold up there. But this doesn't they became solidly middle class, and it doesn't give any indication of what's going to happen to her later or where she's going to go. When we grew up, what we knew about my mother was that she was somebody you wanted to be friends with when she was young. Everybody said she was stunningly beautiful. She was 5'10". She had huge boobs. That was one of the first things anybody said about her.
Like me.
And what?
Like me.
Oh, yeah, exactly. She was stacked. And they said she was brilliant. She was witty. She was the kind of friend you keep for life. She was a writer for Women's Wear Daily, and she worked at the New York Herald Tribune. She interviewed celebrities. And I used to think it was a big deal. She would show me clippings of the newspaper articles she wrote in the 60s. And I didn't know who John Gielgud was. I didn't know who Rex Harrison was, but I knew they were famous at the time. And she talked about how famous they were. And she would give me a lot of tips on how to go out there and do things that are hard. It's hard to go out and use celebrities. So we knew who she was when she was young and that she had been somebody cool. To be a reporter in 1957 in New York City or 1962 and to be a woman is a big deal. One of our favorite things was that she took my Aunt Nora to a Beatles concert at Shea Stadium in 1965. On August 15th, my mom was one of the reporters interviewing the Beatles, and she said they kept pointing to her in the back of the press conference and said, "Yes, that blonde in the back of the room, that one. We'll take the question from her." And of course, my Aunt Nora, who was only 13 at the time, thought that was the biggest deal of all time. And my mom had an apartment at number 2 James Street in Greenwich Village. This is kind of like the stuff of our childhood. Yeah. These are our legends, the stories that my mother told about her youth in New York, that she had parties that she still told stories about that. She said that there was a captain of a Navy ship who showed up in her living room. They had looking for members of his crew because he'd been missing for 2 days. And she's like, "I don't know where he is." And they found him asleep behind one of the sofas. And there's no way of knowing whether that's true. You never knew whether any of her stories were true or how hard they'd been stretched.
It's funny you say that because you hear these stories and you think there's no way that happens. And then you meet someone who knew her and they tell a story. Not only did that happen, but this also happened on top of that. So it's funny how that works.
Well, yeah, and you meet people who you would expect had nothing to do with your mother, and somebody would say, "Oh my God, you're Maureen's daughter," and you'll hear stories, and you never know whether they're going to be about the bad things or the good things. She
Right.
ruined my life. She saved my life. It's
Right.
kind of even odds.
So a number of things happened to my mother in this time frame or just after, in 65. She had two more babies, a daughter that she named Anne Margaret and a son that she named David, and they were both given up for adoption. One of them had a father that my mom used to say was nicknamed Mr. Irresponsible. And the other was a man that she met on a beach the day that Marilyn Monroe died. She always said when she told us that, and this we didn't find this out till much later in life, that everybody was so upset about Marilyn Monroe dying. She was looking for comfort. So she had a liaison with a man on the beach. I don't know if it was on the beach. I don't like to think about that, but she met the man on the beach and she ended up pregnant by him. And then, years later, she wanted to connect with children. She never stopped thinking about them. And the records were sealed. And this is for a later podcast.
The stories that my mother tells, like the story about Marilyn Monroe dying, she said she was on a beach. She was always very specific about a beach outside anymore. And she said everybody was hanging out. It was a beautiful afternoon. It was sunny and it was hot. And everybody was listening to the radio and in the water. And she said it was one of these weird moments where everybody just went silent
Yeah, hush.
and hush fell over the entire thing. And all you could hear was the sound of the radio because on the news, the radio was reporting Marilyn Monroe's death and that everybody just went completely quiet and listened and there was nothing else. And those are the kind of stories and details that she told you that just really imprinted in your brain. She was an excellent storyteller.
For sure.
And so at some point after all of this,
My favorite story.
yeah, my mother, Maureen Smith, met Donald McGovern. And she met him at either the Lion's Head or the 55 on Christopher Street in the Village. And we know this because, these were the stories she told. Well, the Village was the most important place in the 1960s, and this is where the beatniks were. This is where, your father used to hang out with Allen Ginsberg, and those were the two bars that were the cool bars. And she met him there, but he was married, and he had a 3-year-old son. And so my father was not a good candidate for a boyfriend, but my mother didn't care. And she said that when she met him, she was with a friend of hers and she saw him getting out of a cab across the street. And he was wearing a tuxedo. He had come back from Suke. He loved to wear tuxedos and beautiful clothes. And she said to her friend, "He's beautiful. He's mine." And when she walked in, she danced with him and she walked up to her and she said, "I'm crazy about you and I'm going to marry you." And he said, "Lady, you don't even know me." She said, "I don't care. That doesn't matter." And that was it. They were together from that point on. And so many lives were changed because of that. It was just one of those moments. And they ended up running a bar together. And neither one of them was a person who should run a bar, but they did. They ran a bar together in East Village called the Corner Bistro. Anyway, so the bar, this is the kind of thing they did. They started off the bar as a theater bar. My father used to work in the theater there. It was just the place for people to hang out after the theater and a place for actors and a place for people behind the scenes and for directors. And it was a cool place to be. But they ran out of money and they borrowed money from the mafia to keep the bar going. And then it became a mafia bar. It was just kind of a disaster. And they, of course, couldn't afford to pay off loans that they made to the mafia. There was a credit card scheme involved. And my father ended up getting stabbed in the kidneys by the mafia. And they left. They just decided it wasn't for them. And they went to California. And they left behind my father's first wife and my father's son and all of their families. And they just never went back.
It's funny. My dad used to tell a story about being stabbed in the kidneys that time that he said they had taken him into the bathroom and they stabbed him and he thought he was going to die. He thought, this is it. I'm dead. And a bum knocked on the door of the bathroom. And he was so adamant that he'd been in the bathroom that the guys who had stabbed him stopped stabbing him. And that's how he lived. He said, he used to say, a bum saved my life. So after they left for California, Don and Maureen had 4 girls in 6 years. And they finally got married in 1975 when I was 6 weeks old. They had settled into what was a normal life for them for about 10 years. And they had a farm in California, in the desert out in Little Rock, where my dad worked for KTTV. He wanted to be an actor. But he was also a gentleman farmer. And when my mom, when we were little, she was a very involved, loving mother. She loved to bake. She loved to make soups. Like that was her big thing, soups. And she taught us all how to cook. And no one could roast a potato or a chicken. Okay. So, we used to go to museums. We used to go to parks, all the road trips. And we would look at stars out on the patio. We sang songs in the car, mostly Willie Nelson and John Denver. And she used to tell us about the olden days in the Adirondacks. And it was just story after story of how magical the Adirondacks were. And, when the holidays came around, she would sing Christmas carols in Latin. And I can still sing a Deste Fidelis in Latin, much to my children's excitement. She loved Marvin Gaye. When we sing along on the radio, I have fond memories of being in a car with my mom.
After, I don't know how good things were, how good things weren't. It seemed good to us. It seemed like a normal life. But finally, my father had enough and there was a kind of a mess. But my father left and my mom packed us up and things just went whirlwind into chaos, into like the lid of what's going on here. It never ended. She gave up all pretense at being law abiding or normal or an upstanding wife and citizen. And from that point on, from about September of 1980 until she died in 2017, she did whatever the hell she wanted. And she did whatever she pleased. And she did not listen to anybody's advice. And with all four of us, she moved up to Lake Luzerne, New York, near the Adirondacks, for 3 months. And we only lasted 3 months till the first winter. And in the middle of that first winter, she burned down the house for the insurance check. And then we fled and we went to Houston, and then 4 or 5 houses in Houston, then 4 or 5 houses in Los Angeles, then 2 different places in Oregon, and then back to California, and then back to New York, and then to Connecticut, and then upstate New York, and then I don't even know where, South Carolina and the Bahamas. And
I feel like after upstate New York for the last time is kind of where we all split off.
yeah, it all just went everywhere from there. I don't even know what happened, but up until that point, at least, all 4 of us were along for the ride.
We were together. We were always there.
And we were a close-knit family. I mean, whether it was happy or not was a whole different ballgame. And I don't even know if we were unhappy.
I had a happy childhood. I know that people think, are you insane? How did you enjoy this? But for me, I mean, I was with my sisters. I was with my mom who loved me. We always had animals. We had fun house. We lived in beautiful places, near rivers in Oregon, and we would jump in the river. I mean, I know it's not conventional, but I personally had a wonderful childhood. I don't know about you.
Yeah, that's because you weren't the oldest taking care of all 3 of you. We were along for the ride.
I was along for the ride. I was like, let's go.
I was the one making breakfast for you. So I didn't have a terrible childhood, actually. I read a lot. I enjoyed my childhood. It wasn't bad. It just wasn't normal. There were a lot of things that I would change if I could change, but I don't think that by any stretch that I was abused, maybe neglected, but not abused.
All right. So, along the way on this journey, my mom she was very kind, and she took in children that had no place to go. She fed countless teenagers. She offered her home to anybody who needed a place to stay. And she was a big champion of liberal causes and ideas. And she read voraciously, and she made certain that no one she knew would have ever voted for a Republican. I will say she would have loved for a political climate. Sorry, that's for another podcast. But, we all knew that we had the coolest mom and the coolest houses in the neighborhood. And if anybody was ever hungry or bored or was going through a difficult time, our house was the place to be. We were a safe house for a lot of people.
In the middle of all this, there was a period of about 2 years, which happily coincided with the time that I was in high school. So I had kind of got a good high school experience because of this. From 1984 to 1986, my mom had some money and she had some peace. We all did, because she went on a game show called Sale of the Century, and she
We're in
won.
Los Angeles at this time.
Yeah, we were in LA. And She won $58,000 as a champion, which I'm telling you, in 1980, that was a year's salary. That was like the equivalent of like 120,000 or 150,000 today. I'm just guessing, but it was a lot of money. It was enough that you couldn't really buy a house with it outright, but you could live. You could get on your feet. You could buy a car. You could do a down payment on a house. If you had a job, you could actually create a good life for yourself out of it. And my mother was not the kind of person who could do that and have a stable life, but it was amazing. It was a game of trivia and knowledge. This was her thing. She was very, very good at it. And she actually went on and became grand champion. And she competed in Australia. And when she was in Australia, she swindled all of the other competitors out of their wallets. She took out rental cars in their names. She ran from the police for 6 weeks. And she had my two youngest sisters, Nora and Morgan, with her at this point. It was a lot.
So before we get into that whole thing, I did just Google it, and $58,000 in 1984 is the equivalent of $176,000 today, which is a
Yeah.
shit of money for a single mother in Los Angeles.
It is. I mean, you can't, it's not enough to go buy a house. Then you have nothing to live on ever. You can't just go buy a house outright. But it's enough to have a down payment on a house and money for a couple of years while you figure out an income. And it's certainly enough to, if you just want to rent, you could just rent a house for 10 years with that money. It's a lot of money.
So we're in Australia now, and I was one of the two children that my mom took with her. They had given her a business class ticket to Australia from New York, and she cashed it in and got 3 coach tickets. So myself and my older sister, Morgan, and I went with my mom to Australia. We were there for about 6 weeks, and it was, I mean, we had a great time. And 3/4 of the way through, we realized that, hey, there's no money. Where's the money coming from? We'll dive deeper into how the whole Australia went down. But yeah, it was a chaotic couple of weeks or a couple of months. But so between 1980 and 2010, my mom, she had been arrested all over the place. I mean, she was arrested in London, Paris, Vermont, Texas, South Carolina, Kentucky, New Hampshire, Florida, California, and New York.
Did we live out the Bahamas?
And the Bahamas.
No, I was thinking
This is kind of like hand in hand with the Florida trip. Like she was arrested in the Bahamas. Or I guess
yeah, I didn't remember. I wasn't there for that, so I don't know.
wasn't actually arrested in the Bahamas, but she was arrested in Florida. And that's another whole episode of how Maureen and I were involved in that whole thing. But, she was really good. She was arrested a lot, but she was released a lot. She was released because she could talk her way out of anything. And she could talk her way, out of a lot of the jail time by justifying what she had done. And she was able to justify what she did. And, while she did serve time in both federal and local prisons, in my opinion, she didn't serve as much time as she probably should have. But when she was in jail, and I know that sounds awful, but she did, she hurt a lot of people financially. When she was in prison, she would send us these pictures and these envelopes filled with pictures of flowers, letters, and poems that she wrote on scraps of paper. And she would complain about the food and the guards. And there was absolutely not a morsel of remorse in anything that she ever wrote to me anyway. And she considered that stealing from insurance companies and defrauding people and writing bad checks was really a victimless crime. She would say, it's just money. It's not like I'm hurting anyone. And they're all insured. They'll get it back. That was my thing that I was, it's fine. They're insured.
So, I mean, we'll get into all of the things that she did, but in the obituary, I just came out with it. She wrecked cars for the insurance money. She stole things out of purses. She ran a credit card scheme with houses for sale. They actually went and filmed an episode about her for America's Most Wanted, but Nora will tell you this at another point. It was never aired, and the sheriff that got an interview in it was really mad that it never aired because he didn't get his 15 minutes of fame.
He did come into the bar where I was working in South Carolina and talking about it. So that was a really fun experience for me.
She was in and out of mental hospitals a lot, and sometimes it was because she was mentally ill, and sometimes it was because it would get her out of jail. And then she finally found a few years of peace when she remarried our father, which was just something. That was in 2004. And my father had been through a Russian bride by that point who had divorced him. And, she was kind of a mail order bride that took him for all his money. And he had a live-in girlfriend that was kind of awful. My mom just went up to the house and threw her out. And they managed to have a couple years together in a cabin in Conway, Arkansas. I don't even know how they ended up there. And they wrote bad checks.
There. They ended up there because it was affordable and they wanted a place where they could sit by a lake and read books.
Yeah. And not have, yeah. They lived on my dad's pensions. They wrote bad checks. They watched TV. They grew tomatoes. And then my dad died and she was untethered again. There was nothing to keep her down, keep her in one place. She spent the last 3 years of her life running. And she went from Arkansas to San Diego and back. And finally, in 2017, she found some sort of peace, according to the priest who performed last rites. I hope he's right.
My mom will be remembered for a lot of things. We remember her forward, her sharp wit, her biting wit, her love of good food, great writing, her fantastic conversation. She could talk to anybody. She had a comprehensive knowledge of British mystery novels. She had a stunning ability to cook great meals with no money and no ingredients. She had a flair for witty comebacks and a love for her children that, unfortunately, she was unable to translate into protection or a home for us. She also had an absolutely unmatched ability to manipulate any system, a mean streak, patch to the bone. She had a penchant for nerve pills. There was a deep sadness that this brilliant, vibrant woman was never able to rise above the demons that control. It's very heartbreaking. And my mom's philosophy, she always used to say, was a little bit to the left of woohoo. And her theme song was always by the Rolling Stones, I can't get no satisfaction. And she used to say that she wanted the words, she wept on her headstone, complete with a weeping.
And, this was a hard piece to write, but we kind of, we decided at the end not to do she wept on her headstone. I mean, talk about melodramatic. We're not doing that. And we just decided that it was just too much and too over the top. And I didn't want her to be remembered as somebody who was just sad and weeping because that wasn't who she was. And I didn't want that to be who she was. And so we ended up with Forever Wild on her headstone, although we did do the Weeping Willow. And
it was beautiful.
I think Forever Wild is way more what she wanted for us and what we wanted for her. That we want, I like the idea of Forever Wild and that she was untamed, undisciplined.
That's kind of what she wanted for her children also. She was, my sister Morgan always says, conformity is for suckers.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was kind of my mom's for it as well. But so backing up a little bit, the obituary was originally written while I was in Arkansas with my sister Kate. And I had taken over as my mom's guardian on paper anyway from Texas while she was living in Arkansas. And I received a phone call from one of the helpers in her facility that if I wanted to say goodbye to her, I had to. So I flew out there the next day. Katie came a day later and I was there for a couple of dates with her. And I was there alone with her and with the priest when he read her last rites. It was heartbreaking and it was hopeful. I had a lot of hope because she did grow up in the Catholic Church and it meant a lot to her that there was a priest there that did this for her. But, it's funny when I showed up there, I was wearing, it was not August. I was wearing a gray t-shirt, like a dark gray t-shirt. It was my favorite t-shirt, which is very casual. Then I leaned over her bed and I said, "Hey, Mama, I'm here." And, Christ. And she looked up at me and she looked at my shirt. She said, she was very weak. She said, "Nora, ever wear that color again, it's awful on you." And that's the first thing she said to me after I flown from Houston with the connecting flight on the tiny little plane and stopped my whole life with my small children to be there for her. It was just such a funny, worrying thing.
I could have been at my mother's side when she died. And I had at that point made some kind of peace with my mother, at least on my end. And I couldn't do it. But Nora and I talked and we said, we need to write something about this. That's what I do when I'm sad. That's what I do when I'm overwhelmed. I start writing. So I wrote. And so I wrote this obituary and I sent it to Nora when she was there. And of course, it's terrible when your mother dies. No matter who you are, no matter where you are in the world, when your mother dies, it's one of the worst days of your life. But when she's complicated, when you have a bad relationship with her, when she's yelling at you for what you look like on the day she's dying, things are complicated and hard. And so I sent this to Nora and I kind of got the nod from her, the reaction from her. We had gone back and forth on which right when I sent her like the post draft. She told me, tell me what you thought of the whole thing and all that.
So, the first time I read it, I was with Katie and Katie was asleep and we were in a super cheap hotel room in Conway, Arkansas, or outside of Arkansas somewhere. And I read the first version of it and it was really raw and it was very truthful, but very emotional. Right. And I started crying and I was weeping. It was like one of those guttural sobbings that's very cleansing for you also. But it was heavy. But, being my mom's daughter was heavy. It was a hard thing to do. So Megan and I went back and forth on what to include in the obituary and what to leave out. And there were a few versions of it where it was kind of cleaned up a little bit and made it nicer and not everything was in it. And then we both at the end were just like, you know what, fuck it. Just do it. Just put it all in there, include it all. And we knew it was going to ruffle some feathers in the family.
I don't think
that wasn't our intention.
Yes, it was not the intention to ruffle feathers. It was the intention to, I don't even know what the intention was. The intention was to, I think we were both so angry at the same time that we were relieved that we just wanted to put it out there and get it behind us and be done with my mother because this had been years of pain.
Yeah.
And it ended up hurting a lot of people that we didn't intend to hurt. And we had everybody's hurt at funerals. That's one of the things that I learned badly. And I should have known this years ago, but no matter what you do or say at a funeral, it's the wrong thing to do or say. And everybody thinks that they have the corner on how to talk about the person that died and that they have the right view of the person that died. But we had a lot of people coming up to us that we loved, some of my favorite people in the world who I would never want to hurt, saying, how dare you? I am so angry. I'm really speaking to you. And this is the person that we should be comforting each other and holding each other after my mother died. And instead they're like, I don't want anything to do with you. How could you put that out there? And you and I were stunned by that. We didn't expect that. That had never been a reaction by anybody we loved ever about anything.
Nobody had ever been mad at us for, okay, obviously, this is something that I had never been done before, where we had talked so openly about our mother on a public forum. And it was posted to Facebook and it got picked up really quick by a lot of people. And a lot of people read it. And within hours, I received emails and phone calls from people, again, that we love and adore and would never want to hurt. And the big question was, why in the hell would you do that? Why would you share an intimate story of their sister, aunt, their second cousin, their friend? And at the end of the day, she was our mother. And my reasoning for sharing it was these are all, everything in the obituary was something that made her who she was. And because of who she was, infected who I was. And I'm a big believer that where you came from does affect where you're going. And, it's a hard thing to talk about, but I wanted to let people know, and you wanted to let people know that this was our mom.
I think this is a story worth telling. I think there are a lot of, certainly lessons you can get out of this, certainly lessons we learned out of it. And one of the things Nora and I like to joke about, it's kind of funny, is, once it went, this lady who reads obituaries on TikTok, she finds interesting obituaries and reads them. And she read this one and she read it out loud about a condensed version of it. And it got like 3 million views or something. And it was very weird and raw to see somebody else using my words and our story to make.
Oh, this was like 6 or 7 years after.
It was something like, why is she making money off my mother's story, first of all? And,
right.
Why are people responding to this? But then we started laughing. We were like, my mom would be so pissed off that she's not making money off of this. Like, what would she do if she knew it went viral? She'd be like, where's my cut? How do I get royalties out of this? Where's my agent?
Right.
And she would probably even add more details about it and say, wait a minute, you got that story wrong. Let me tell you about this story if you think that's something. And also, what's my cut?
Well, it's interesting to me, and a lot of people knowing that we're doing a podcast and talking about the podcast and why now? Well, a lot of it is because that did go viral, and I did a deep dive on TikTok, like looking at the comments on it, and I thought the comments on it were so interesting because there were very few people that thought, "God, she's such an asshole. Why would anybody want to be friends with them?" 99% of the people on TikTok, yes, I know, so when I did that, shocker say, but the majority of the people on responding to the obituary were talking about what an incredible life she had and what an incredible reaction her daughter had to be able to see who my mom was with her words in this obituary. And what you have written about mom really resonated with a lot of people and did her justice. And it was a beautiful story of a girl who had some tough things happen to her when she was little and never really dealt with them properly. And obviously, there's a lot to dive into it later as we progress on this, as far as what happened to mom when she was little and how it affected her moving forward.
Anyway, for me, the reaction to the TikTok kind of prompted me to push you to do this podcast because I think that the stories are worth telling. I think there's a lot of hope and inspiration in the way that mom, grew up and the way that we grew up and how we're both pretty incredible people giving our backgrounds on this.
Well, I mean, I always think of myself as somebody who is a hot mess and not inspirational, well, to anybody, although you are, I'm sure, an inspiration to many.
I try to be. Yeah, honestly, it is what it is.
I mean, I agree with you, though. I do think this resonates with a lot of people. And the other thing I want to say, and I think we need to kind of wrap this up, but I cannot, with retrospect and with hindsight, obviously, we would have waited longer for this to have the obituary come out. And I think anybody who has grown up or lived with or loved somebody who is addicted or somebody who has mental illness or somebody who is just difficult understands that you never have any peace. You can't ever turn off your phone. You can't go anywhere or do anything without wondering if that person's going to be able to get a hold of you, if they're going to need you, if the cops are going to call, if at 2 a.m. you're going to get that phone call. And I never had any peace while my mother was alive. And I think that the people in her family who were upset because for the first time in years and years and years, for them, for the first time in their life, they were going to get that peace. They were going to get a minute where there were no phone calls and no one was afraid of what was going to happen. And no one was going to call and say, what about Maureen? And then we published the obituary and then they got phone calls saying, what are we going to do about Maureen?
We screwed up their plans for big hardcore.
And for those listening who were affected by this, obviously we adore you and are sorry. It's not.
No, and I mean, I don't think it's something to laugh about, but also it was honestly, we did not believe, first of all, that they would even ever read this. I didn't think anybody ever read
it was
a Facebook post.
It was, yeah. I mean, it wasn't written for people to take so seriously. It was just, I think a lot of it was closure. Yeah. It was,
anybody who wanted closure is kind of screwed because we're still talking about it, So I don't know, man.
Yeah. We got the opposite out of that we're looking for.
But anyway, thank you all for joining us. I think this wraps up the first episode of Forever Wild. We hope you like this and you'll be looking forward to more. And we'll have another episode next week. Nora, what are we going to do next week?
So next time on Forever Wild, we're going to talk about some of our mom's scams, but she wouldn't have called them scams. She would have said that they were the grand plans. We'd love to hear feedback and comments, plus ideas that you'd like to hear about. If we've touched on anything today that resonated with you and you think you'd like us to expand upon, let us know. And of course, for those of you who knew our mom, please let us know your stories. We'd love to share your stories. And we'd love to hear what the McGovern girls look like to the outside, to a normal family.
I don't know if I want to hear that or not. But
I do. I like to hear it.
that's all right. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening.